It's a story that kind of leaves you scratching your head a little bit when you see that here we are, dire need of doctors, not just in this province, but in this country, and finding out that so many people who decide to follow, or at least go into that profession, who can't get into medical school here, end up going to study abroad, whether it's in England, Scotland, Australia, wherever, and graduate with degrees, and then thinking they'd like to come back home and work here, can't. And what's even more interesting about that is the fact that the numbers of those who can come back has been going down for years now. So we wanted to follow up. Greg Mercer's an investigative reporter at the Globe and Mail where the story appeared, and he's on the line. Greg, thanks for the time this afternoon.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to talk about this.
Yeah, so let's start with, first of all, how widespread this is. I read in your column that you say 9 out of 10 students who apply to medical school in this country don't get accepted, so they opt to go someplace else. Now, are we talking about hundreds or thousands?
Oh, I mean, it's thousands. And that's, acceptance rates vary around the country, but that's generally about 90% of medical schools are turning away. 90% of applicants are being turned away from medical schools in this country. And these are people with top grades, excellent qualifications, people who would make very good physicians, but they never get the chance. So as you said in your intro, they get frustrated and they're going abroad to try to get that medical degree that they've always wanted.
And they get those degrees and they graduate, and it would seem, of course, the problem then begins. If you wanted to come back to Canada to get a residency here, you simply can't. So, and as I said again, you point out in your article, it didn't used to be this way all the time.
Absolutely, yeah. Only about 13% of all the residencies that we give out as a country every year go to people who were trained overseas, and that includes Canadians who left the country. The vast majority come from people who were educated in Canada. In the 80s, there were almost twice as many residencies given out to internationally educated graduates. We've completely closed down that supply of doctors in recent decades, and now we're seeing the consequence of that.
Kind of begs the question why, doesn't it?
I really struggle to comprehend this. Is it just simply, I don't know, is it too hard for our admittance, to get into medical school here? Or is it, I'm really struggling to understand this situation.
So I think it's a cost thing. I think in the 90s, a lot of provincial governments were very concerned that the supply of doctors was too big. And so they started closing down avenues for people to become doctors. They started cutting back admissions about 10% across the board. They cut down enrollment at medical schools in this country deliberately to reduce the supply of doctors. And at that time, it actually made some sense. But 30 years on, it no longer makes sense, but we're still living with the legacy of those decisions. And the system has been very slow to adjust and respond to the shortage that is now crippling many parts of this country.
And so I'm just wondering, too, I'm looking at the numbers because, of course, we're in Quebec. And it would, surprise, it would seem, according to your article, Quebec has the lowest percentage of foreign-trained family doctors in the entire country. We're even below 8%. The next lowest is almost at 14% in PEI.
That's true, and I think part of it is the language issue for Quebec, right? So you would need to go to a French-speaking university in many cases that would have a standard of education considered to be equal to a Canadian university. There's not as many of those places in the eyes of Canadian, admissions officials. That's part of the issue. So I think language does play a role in Quebec's situation.
Craig, one of the things I'm also trying to understand is obviously we're in a healthcare crisis in this country, but it's bad elsewhere as well. So why would it be more advantageous to those doctors who have been trained elsewhere to stay working in those countries? Is it not as bad a situation in their healthcare systems as it is here?
I mean, I think they ultimately want a job. They want to go wherever they can be employed.
Right, yeah.
And as the competition for these folks heats up, I mean, countries around the world, very developed, rich countries, are throwing more and more money at doctors, trying to entice them to come work there. So international graduates are looking around and saying, why would I try to go to Canada when I can't even get in? When I could go to the U.S. and I'm on equal footing with American graduates, I can make a good wage. And that often happens. We're losing a lot of really good Canadian medical graduates who are educated in places like Ireland. They're going to the U.S. because they can't come home.
But if they change the system way back when to make it more difficult, to make it less accessible to people, how complicated can it be to go in the opposite direction? Make it more accessible, make it easier for people to get in.
It takes political will. I mean, there's a cost. I mean, so provincial governments have to pay to fund these residencies. They would create them and they would fund them. and then medical faculties run by the medical schools would need to supervise those students, those residents. So that what that requires is political will and some money, but it's a fraction of the cost of expanding seats at Canadian medical schools, and it can be done a lot more quickly than expanding medical school seats in Canada.
Do you sense
could be working next year rather than in 5 or 10 years?
Oh,
do you sense that will exist?
I think we're seeing it. We're seeing it in certain provinces. British Columbia, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia have taken steps recently to increase residencies specifically for these people, for Canadians who were educated abroad. So certainly there's more awareness of this than perhaps even 6 months ago, that there is a problem here, a choke point in the system. Some provinces are trying to get ahead of others and respond.
By the way, I will point out, because I think the really interesting part, I know you interviewed a couple of students actually in the midst of this, but you also point out, and who would have known this, there are nearly 300 Canadian students enrolled in one single program at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and they've actually kind of set up a Canadian team club, if you will, because there's so many of them there.
It's wild. There's more Canadians there than any other nationality. It feels almost like a Canadian university in the middle of Dublin, Ireland. I mean, it's like Canada's 18th medical school just across the ocean. And this is where people are going in this country because they cannot get into medical school here.
I mean, it sounds kind of fun, like traveling and studying abroad, and then having a little gang of people who are doing the same. So you've got your colleagues and friends, if you will. You've created a community. However, is there a sense of frustration that they've been forced into this situation that is sort of their last hope?
Most definitely. I mean, these are some of the best of the best. These students have excellent grades. They want to come back and be a part of the solution to the doctor crisis in this country. And they express to me and to others that they're very frustrated at what they see as roadblocks. And so they know that ultimately they're going to end up in the U.S. or Australia or the U.K. They'd rather be in Canada, but as a country, we're making it very hard for them to do that. It's
interesting. We've talked here before the situation, and again, I'm going to, from a Montreal, from a Quebec perspective, we've met people here who've come from European countries who are qualified medical professionals. They're driving taxis. Yeah. And here we are looking for doctors because you can't even find a GP here. And I know this is the problem, as Natasha said, not just in Quebec, but across the country. These people are already here. I mean, forget about Canadians going over there who can't come back. Is there a will, do you think, to take some of these qualified people and be able to basically include them in our healthcare system?
I think we're seeing provinces take more serious looks at how they do that. The problem with that is that levels of medical school education vary around the world. And so Canadian officials have to figure out, well, how do we assess someone's level? If you have a medical degree from Iran, what does that mean? What are your qualifications? They have not figured out how to do that in an efficient way yet. But I do think we're seeing increasingly provinces turn their minds to this question, because you're right. There are literally thousands of Canadians who were practicing as medical doctors in other countries who are now here not working in their field. Those people, if we allow them a path to become licensed, could go a long way to helping ease the shortages that we're experiencing. And
you say that could happen in as easily as 1 year.
Yeah, provinces do things like they have a practice-ready assessment. That's on-the-job supervision where they assess, are you able to be a doctor in a Canadian setting? Problems, the capacity is very small. Provinces need to spend more money to expand the capacity of those kind of programs.
Just as a final question, I asked about the will of governments. You seem to think that will is maybe, if it's not there now, it maybe is getting there. What about the universities here, those 17 medical schools who make it so difficult for these people to come in? How much are they involved in this?
Well, that's part of the issue. I mean, they are protective of their own turf, right? And they supply most of the doctors in Canada. So you have to get them on board. Of course, they know who pays their bills, and they know that they are subsidized by government. So if government ultimately says you must do this, they don't have a lot of room to push back. But certainly that is one of the obstacles that need to be overcome, that Canadian medical schools have to get on board and realize that this is one of the solutions to the crisis in this country.
It's kind of breaking my heart, I got to tell you, like knowing that there's a solution there, right under our nose, that could drastically change the face of the healthcare system within a year in Canada. I'm kind of speechless. Great work,
It's hard
Greg.
to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sure is. Greg, thank you so much. Yeah, terrific stories in the Globe and Mail if you want to check it out. Greg MERCER, investigative reporter there. Thank you, Greg.
My pleasure.